Welcome to the Exit Ready podcast. Ryan Ray here as always. Today you're going to love the episode. Be sure to never miss what's going on with the Exit Ready cohort intensive by going to www.rgahub.com/exit ready. That's rgahub.com/exit ready. I'll put a link to this in the description below so you can check it out. But if you're an owner, you're not going to want to miss this. Now, let's get to the show. Well, Alan, thank you for the time today. How's it going, man?
It's going really well, Ryan. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Okay, get into it real quick with who you are, your background, and kind of what you do in this M&A world, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. So my name is Alan Peterson. I'm out of Tampa, Florida. I'm a senior business development officer with First Internet Bank on the SBA side. So I'm an SBA lender that only does business acquisitions, partner buyouts, or if an operator is looking to buy a building, I can help them there. I specialize with first-time buyers, but I've worked with a ton of existing operators looking to expand, right? So I see a lot of industries and I see a lot of different sellers and I've seen a lot of different situations, as you might imagine.
Yeah, and so let's just pause there because you said First Internet Bank, and people go, First Internet Bank? I never even heard of that. And what I have to stress to people is in the SBA world, most of the great lenders you've never heard of. And so maybe unpack kind of why it is and how that works, because they might be thinking, oh, I'll bank at Regions or Chase or Wells Fargo or wherever. And so why is it that these banks specialize in SBA?
Absolutely. And, Ryan, to your point, I got to be honest, I never heard of First Internet Bank before they started recruiting me, right? So they're based out of Fishers, Indiana. And I think last year we may have finished at number 6 in production. I'd have to double check. But, the difference in banks, I would say, is there's banks that do SBA loans, right? And then there's SBA banks. So as far as our offerings go, SBA is a big piece to our puzzle. For that reason, we want to make loans. We want to find a way to make sure we're doing good deals, but we're a big focus of the bank, right? So we're a preferred lender. What that means ultimately, Ryan, is that we have the delegated authority of the SBA. There's a lot of banks that don't have that. So they'll get the package, they'll underwrite it, and they send it out to their regional office, reporting to DC, the SBA itself. We don't have to do that. We make all decisions in-house and nothing is outsourced in our process. So that's essentially who we are and what we're about.
Yeah, and I can't stress this enough, is that if you're a buyer or a seller, in this case, is mainly who we're talking to, just because your local bank says it's not SBA qualified doesn't mean it's not SBA qualified. And that's why you go to people who are specialists, because I can't tell you the times I talk to someone and they go, oh yeah, the bank won't do it, because it's like, well, the SBA rules or the bank? There's a big difference there. And a lot of people just think the bank, and they don't realize kind of the complexity that SBA, it helps, but also brings into this. And so if you're not up to speed on the rules, then you might think that it's not SBA doable, but it's really just your bank. And so I always try to stress that, because deals get killed over that all the time.
hmm Yeah, and that's the thing too, right? So SBA lending it's different because it's the rule of two masters, right? You've got the SBA rules; those are non-negotiable. That's it. And then there's the bank rules, right? And they're going to vary by institution by institution. And there's a lot of really well-meaning people that do what I do, Ryan, that mistakenly say, "Oh, the SBA needs X," when really it's their credit officer that says that's what they need, not the program, right? So you're spot on with that advice.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier partner buyouts. So let's just start there for just a second, because the SBA has programs for partner buyouts and for employee buyouts. So what are some of the pros of using the SBA programs for those types of buyouts?
Well, if there's trouble in paradise, right? And I hope there isn't, but if there is, and you're looking to buy out a partner, the rule is that if you have been an active owner in the business for 24 months and the business itself has a 9-to-1, debt to tangible net worth ratio. What that means is for every $1 the business has, essentially, right, they can owe $9. It's a pretty good ratio. It's pretty wide. Obviously, the cash flow needs to support the debt, but it's a deal that's easier to get approved, right? Because we already know we have industry experience. We know that we understand the staff, we understand the key customers, all of that. And a lot of folks then ask, well, Alan, I'm only a 5% partner, but I'm the GM. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. If you're a seller and you're ready to exit and you've got someone that they're a minority partner of yours. Believe it or not, man, that's a much easier exit if you're going to go financing. If you're going to use third parties, you're going to lump sum of cash and go SBA. We can do that with zero down. And that honestly benefits sometimes folks that might be well qualified, right? But maybe their cash isn't in the best position.
Yeah. Now the SBA, and especially selling internally, I think a lot of owners would like to do that. They're not sure how to do that. And so I always recommend to owners, and it sounds counterintuitive, but I think it's the best thing for them to do, is to go to an SBA lender like yourself and to see what the value of the company is. And they might go, well, is the bank going to value it right? It's like, well, okay. Most companies trade for that SBA range, and
Mhm.
a lot of buyers in that range are going to use SBA financing. So at least it's going to tell you, if a buyer is wanting to buy your company, what the SBA, what the bank will lend on your business. Now, you might find this strategic and you might get the needle in the haystack, all that stuff, but most of these deals are in the SBA range, and a lot of buyers are going to look at the SBA to figure out, okay, how much debt can it cover? How does this work? And so, what is the process if an owner goes, okay, I heard that, I got a partner or maybe an employee, or I'm thinking about selling. Like, what's the process for them to just figure out what someone like you would lend on their company if they were to sell?
So what we would look at is ultimately just the financials, right? So I want to see, we have to underwrite to the tax returns ultimately. So when we get into scenarios like this, it's routine. I'll sign an NDA, right, for peace of mind. Review the historic cash flow, right, and make sure we start there. So I could say, hey, Mr. Ms. Seller, judging by what you provided, it's reasonable that this can be supported by a loan based on debt service coverage ratio with certain assumptions on replacement salaries, tweak it a little bit, right? So when they do go to market, at least they know this is the range. Now, let's say, Ryan, for example, they really believe their enterprise value is higher, right? That's fine because the SBA lender cares about verifiable free cash flow to service the debt. We're not going to put a number on it. So if you say, oh, you can lend 3 million, but I think it's worth 4, and I bet you a third party valuation comes in at 4, that's fine. But that extra million has got to come from cash somewhere, whether it's a seller note, whether it's a contingent note, right? Because we can't do an earnout, but we can tie notes to benchmarks. And that can get complicated. We do it a lot. Or the buyer puts a ton of cash down, man. That's possible too. But ultimately, to answer your question, it's a matter of tax returns, the most recent P&L, and then a conversation to understand, are there concentration issues we got to talk about and how we navigate those. But we actually do that more than you might imagine.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point there, because you might say, well, it's worth 4, but the SBA says 3. Okay, so let's just kind of noodle on that for a second. If an owner says, well, I think it's worth 4, obviously you mentioned some options that a buyer might present to get that to be satisfied. But can you tell them, oh, well, to get to 4, based upon our models, this is what
Mm-hmm.
you need to do?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And it's almost like the capacity of, a CEPA, right? Something like that where and I have that designation. So I'm kind of unique in that I'm on the buy side, but I understand, structural capital, et cetera. What I could tell them straight up is, if you want to sell for this and you want the financing to support 90% of this, as SBA will do, your EBITDA has to be here, and I'm going to need it on a tax return. And that's advice we give too, because a lot of sellers just want to get a pulse check because it helps give them direction on what they should be improving on to get to that EBITDA, right? Because again, I'm the SBA guy. I care about verifiable free cash flow. And then it's up to them to work with advisors and partners to, how do they get there? How do they decrease some expense? How do they stop writing off their boat and their kids' braces and everything else from a way that's going to make sense for the bank, right? And that's exactly right. That's how we can increase that over time.
Yeah, and you mentioned tax returns, so let's hone in there for a second, because a lot of owners will run stuff through their business, understandably so. But when you're going to exit, it's going to cost you a lot more than you saved in taxes. So if you're sitting here and you're going, oh, man, I've already done, we're this is early 2026, so 2025 I already did some of that stuff, and taxes are coming up. How many years of taxes are you guys going to look at to get those numbers so that owners know, 2026 to 2027? How many years do they got to fix that?
So we're going to underwrite to the most recent 3 years of business tax returns with the most weight being, being on the most recent year and then the year previous mattering. That third year certainly matters. Don't get me wrong. We're going to use that to identify trends. We're going to look at that for the overall performance. If we're seeing a nosedive from 23, 24, 25, we got to have a conversation why. And that's the reality. But it's the last kind of 3 years. And remember, if it's add back heavy, financial due diligence saves our tail there. If the seller is willing to have the buyer go through a quality of earnings or at least a proof of cash in a lot of cases and say, listen, this is a one-time expense, this is personal, whatever, the buy side can still move forward because the bank will rely on that third party report as a verification that what they're saying is real. The reality, though, is many sellers are hesitant because if you go say, well, I put an addition on my house and I use my staff and it gets messy and there's obviously the IRS, we got to be cognizant of that, right? So I would say the runway, certainly the last year and probably the year prior, we want to clean that up a little bit.
Yeah, don't count on Trump canceling the IRS if you're going to market. He may or may not, but who knows? So don't count on that. Okay, you mentioned quality of earnings and proof of cash. Maybe unpack those for owners who don't know what those terms mean.
Absolutely. So the quality of earnings report, it is going to be a very thorough financial due diligence on your business, right? It's going to start with those same tax returns I've identified, but they're going to go deeper, right? They're going to look to see bank statements, P&Ls, customer reports, invoices. I mean, this thing, forgive me, right? But it's a colonoscopy of the business, right? But it does give a lot more confidence in what the real price is going to be, right? So that's kind of the give and take. A proof of cash is a less invasive, I guess I could say, since I went with colonoscopy. And all that is time bank statements to profit and loss reports to make sure that the cash flow that we're all talking about is real and the cash that came in is from the sources that are appropriate and make sense. It's a lot cheaper. It's a lot quicker. But sometimes it's insufficient for buyers when they start borrowing. They're signing a personal guarantee on $5 million. You know what I mean? They be ready for that for sure.
Yeah, okay. So owner hears colonoscopy. They're like, oh no. Are there some things that they can do to make it less, not intrusive because it's going to be intrusive, but less painful, less, terrible experience for them?
Yeah. And I like to be upfront. I hope that that's all right. I don't want to spook anybody, but the reality is the way you make it less painful is you give that information, you give that contact to your bookkeeper, to your accountant, to your office manager, and you let somebody else handle as much as they can. Because the reality is the level of documentation, it's not like insane. And by the way, I think it's worth calling out. It's not just SBA buyers who very routinely are doing this. Now, if you have a strategic, you might be all right. And what if you don't mind me bringing this up, Ryan? A lot of folks don't know strategics can take you out with zero down. So if you have a strategic, you have a competitor, if you will, an hour and a half away and they do what you do and they're not going to, whatever. But the problem is maybe they're a little cash poor at the moment, or perhaps they want to keep more money in their personal pocket and on their balance sheet. They can do that. They can take you out zero down. And that does not require as much because we've got folks that are in the industry and operating successfully. We'll use a blended cash flow, Ryan, too, of the target, the seller's business, and the existing business combined to determine the cash flow risk of the debt. We're going to include combined services. Maybe we don't need 2 service titan accounts anymore. Maybe we don't need 2 sets of bookkeepers. Maybe we don't. So then it can be very favorable. And a lot of sellers and even brokers don't realize you can take a cash poor strategic and turn that into a closed transaction.
Yeah, I think of strategics as owners need to be careful thinking about strategic. And I'm glad you brought it up because sometimes strategics will pay more because they are strategic. But a lot of owners kind of hear about the strategic deals and don't realize that's probably not the likelihood that they're going to get a strategic because they don't have anything that maybe a strategic buyer would want to buy from them. So is there any trends that you've noticed that strategic buyers go after when they're coming for a certain type of company?
What I've seen in my personal experience, generally, it's crews, right? It's labor. To your point, like a strategic in the traditional sense is going to want something that you have that they don't. The folks that I've seen kind of do that strategy are really just looking for bodies that are already well trained. Sometimes they're folks with real experience, and estimators are very valuable to get them in, experienced folks like that. More license holders as they want to branch off and do other things, or even you've got a plumbing company trying to get into HVAC, not to just talk home services, but that's something we see too. It's a little bit of a pivot, but it's the same general style of employee, right? We're still loading up the vans and getting to the homes in the resi side. So that's kind of what I saw, what I seen. It's really labor. It's because it's not much else. Now there's exceptions in manufacturing, right? We'll see that, but generally it's more common, at least on the Main Street level, right? Where I play, I can't speak to mid market and above. That would be out of my
Yeah,
expertise.
sure. I would say that if you're listening to this, the only caveat I'd make there is, hey, quick break here. If you're an owner, do you know that most companies will never actually sell? That means that all those years that you put into building your business are for nothing. If you want to build a business that's valuable, that people will want to buy, and you can make potentially millions of dollars from, go to rjhub.com or click in the link below. That's rjhub.com or click on the link below. And now back to the episode. Years ago, we had a company look to buy the company I was working at, and they wanted to know about our MSAs. We had these certain contracts that allowed us to work for these big companies, and the overlap was too much, and so they weren't interested. But they were strategic, willing to pay a premium because they wanted access to these bigger companies. And so there's some kind of nuance in each industry, as you were talking about. But again, the strategic is usually an outlier, not the norm. One thing that we haven't touched on, and maybe unpack this for owners as well, is private equity. And so we hear the private equity this, private equity that. Do you see any private equity playing in the SBA space, or is that going to be outside of SBA?
So that's generally going to be outside of SBA, but I will tell you, PE is buying deeper in certain industries, right? So we see a lot of folks letting us know that larger deals in my world, right, it's $5 million. That's a large deal in my world. That's the SBA 7A cap currently, right? For most, like, I'll see PE offers being communicated, but I'll tell you what, man, I can't speak to your audience of potential sellers or current owners that might be looking to pivot for a variety of reasons. But what I've seen from the buy side perspective is when the buyer and the seller like each other, the seller would rather someone carry on the legacy, honor it, and grow from there, rather than kicking Doris in the back office to the curb day one to tighten up those margins on the PE model. Also, PE very often wants you to still run that thing and make sure you're hitting metrics if they're going to give you the final payout, right? And then you get the double bite of the apple. Fine, that's good. And that's perfect for some people, by all means. But what I found is that interpersonal relationship makes sellers more, interested at times if they're looking to protect the legacy and the culture that they've built. I can't speak for all PE, man. To be honest, I know some great PE guys, and I also know some firms that have done some weird stuff, from what I've heard. Right, so it's really about what you're looking for, how much you care. What does the next chapter look like for you and for your employees? In my view, that's the primary difference. They're buying into some industries. I keep saying it, but HVAC, man, that's a lot of noise around that. But for the most part, those guys are playing upstream from where I'm at.
Yeah, I think I was talking to an owner the other day, and he was talking about he had a conversation with PE, and I was like, well, the problem is you want to leave the business when you sell it. Now, there might be a PE play where they buy you and they let you go, but the way your company's set up, I can just tell you it's not likely unless they have some other strategy. I don't want to say don't, but just understand this is probably not what you want. And so you touched on something there that owners think about money when they exit. And for a lot of owners, they start with money, but then it's going to the restaurant on Thursday night and all your, you're in a small town and you see the old employees and they're like, man, we hate this new ownership or whatever. And so there's a lot of factors that come in play. And so owners need to understand that it's not just that payday, but if that payday is number one for you, how much cash, what percentage of cash on average are you going to get at closing with an SBA type deal? Because if money is, that's all you care about, and some owners can. I'm a capitalist, so I don't care how you want to do it. You understand your options. So if you go, no, cash on closing is my top priority. Well, PE probably isn't going to hit that goal. Second by the apple, as you mentioned. So SBA cash on closing, what's that going to look like?
You're going to get all the cash at closing. You're going to get it all. So the SBA is going to finance 90% of the project. The project will include if the buyer needs some working capital. If you're going to go debt-free, cash-free, which is very common, clear out the cash register and the bank will refill it, and the buyer is going to pay for that money, right? It'll go into their total loan. So they'll have their equity injection of 10%. Or if the seller is willing, they can hold a note for 5% on standby to allow a cash, maybe the right buyer that's a little shorter on cash, get home on it. But at the end of the day, short of a note, you're going to get it all at close.
So standby, how does that work, and what should owners think about when they hear the term standby?
Well, so it sounds like a scary term, and it can be, right? So the rule is if you hold a note for 5% on standby, that means it's subordinate to the SBA loan, which all debt will always be, and it is not payable. You cannot force it to be paid until the retirement, right, of the SBA loan. And people go, well, the SBA loan's 10 years. I'm not waiting a decade. Well, no, you don't have to. When the buyer either pays off early or refinances into conventional commercial debt, that note can start being paid day one. The secondary market data shows us that it would be abnormal for someone to carry an SBA loan, into the 10-year mark. It's just not the way it works. I'm not trying to sell people on holding seller notes, but just remember, it's for the life of the loan, not for the term of the loan. The term is 10 years, but the life is likely going to be around 5.25. I'd have to double check the Lumos data there, but you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah. So if you're selling for $1 million, let's just say, and you got 5% standby, so it's $50K that you're sitting there on your side. And so going back to what we said a minute ago, understanding your top priority, if it is cash on closing, and you're getting 90 to 95%, then that's that money. That's how it's gonna sit out there. Now you can't force them to refinance, stuff like that. But if you go with PE, you might get a lot less. They might pay you a higher premium, they tell you, but that's tied to that second bite of the apple. So you really got to understand what your options are and how you think best for you to proceed. And a lot of owners, you mentioned that you're a SEPA, and a lot of owners don't really understand, the three legs of the stool, kind of how it ties in together, and their business, personal, and financial goals.
Yeah, exactly. And we see that a lot too. We had a guy recently, Ryan, he had a great off-market opportunity in his, geography, right? Maybe 45 minutes from his house. It was a pretty cool industry, keeping it high level, kind of like excavation-ish, thing, something like that. And ultimately the seller, here's the problem. They get down the road, they get the financials, everyone's signing NDAs. We're kind of getting there. We get the LOI together, right? And then all of a sudden the seller has no idea what they want to do next, right? They finally realize that this thing that's been there, blood, sweat, and tears, if you will, that they've built from the ground up, that's now a pretty healthy business, man. For the last 15 years, he doesn't play golf, right? He doesn't want to live on the beach. What is he going to do? And that stalled the deal, right? And ultimately the seller said, man, I do think you're a great buyer, but I'm just not ready. And if they had the right people around them, everyone would have saved a lot of time and money on that as far as paying for due diligence. And the seller, man, he's not running the business because he's bugging his CFO to get these papers together and all that. And he just wasn't ready because he didn't have a vision of the next act. He didn't know what he wanted to do. So I think that's important, and why, if you are a business owner that's thinking about selling, right, at least acknowledge that there's going to be another chapter of your life. What do you want that to look like? Are you committed to getting into that? And surround yourself with people that can really help you figure what that looks like. And not to mention, obviously, a financial advisor.
Yeah.
What are you going to do with that lump sum of cash? How are you going to make sure that you don't get totally hammered on taxes if it's avoidable at all?
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned this particular owner. A lot of owners, they're busy. They're running, putting out fires and stuff, and so they don't realize that becomes part of their identity. That that's who I am, and when that goes away, yeah, for the first month is nice, the first year is nice, but you need to build a business that allows you to kind of step away to figure out what that next act is. Because if you don't, you're going to find yourself, what do I do? And this ties into non-competes. So I don't know, is there an SBA requirement right now for non-competes? I know, like, some, upper deals, 5 years is what you'll see. So do you guys say, hey, owner, you're locked out for 5 years? Because that is relevant to understand if you're going to say, like, oh no, I can't do anything for the next 3 to 5 years.
Right. Yep. So as far as every deal that we do, we're looking for 5 years and a set mileage depending on the current reach of the business and what the industry is. You have to realize, I mean, if you're a seller and you're a stud and you've been there, done that, you know the customers, you know the vendors, you know your way around it. You're a shark in this fish tank, man, that the bank's money's behind. So we can't let you get into that, and you got to be careful with it because it's enforceable, right? Like you violate that, I mean, that's a real there's a real consequence for that. And I think that's the thing is, to your point, Ryan, is of course it's their identity, man. It's what they built, and are you ready to let it go? And who do you want to let it go to, right? And it's interesting, man. It's a lot going on, and there's a lot to think about. The more people that you can kind of surround yourself with, in my view, a group effort is always going to uncover more opportunity for meaningful discussion. And well, don't forget about this, right? Because I'm really good at my lane, man. I'm not trying to beat my chest, but I know my lane really well. The rest of it, I gotta rely on others, man, because I don't know the other pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, I was talking to an owner, and he's like, "Well, what if I start this other business that's the same business, but different name and different ownership and all this stuff. And if it grows and I sell, then I'll sell it as well. If it doesn't grow, I'll just keep that and then keep doing that." I'm like, bro, we gotta get you to talk to an M&A attorney because what you're talking about might cost you a bunch of money. You don't want to play this game. Owners kind of they have a higher risk tolerance in general.
Yeah.
And then they kind of assume that, oh, I can just play the game the way that I played it for so long. It's like, well, when you go through this process, there's a lot of risk because if you're an owner, what I always ask owners is, okay, if I can improve the value of your company by, a million, depending on the size, $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, whatever it is, does that sound good? Yeah, it sounds great. Okay, pay me $500,000 and I'll tell you how to do that. Oh, I don't want to do that. What happens if this? What happens if that? It's like, right. So you're asking someone to pay millions of dollars for your company. And that's the same thing. Like, what happens if? Like, that's the same question that buyers have. Just like I can tell you, and because you and me know that it's not like we're super smart. We just kind of know the levers to pull and what to do. And so, yeah, for $2 million, $500,000, it's a good deal. But what if?
Mhm.
And buyers are asking the but what if question on all aspects of these companies because they don't have this knowledge that owners have. And owners have just kind of swam in this pond for so long that it's just so comfortable, it feels good, the water's warm, come on in. And they don't look at it from the outside risk. I always ask that question, like, okay, if I can increase by $2 million, you pay $500,000, and they always jokingly say, "Yeah." I say, "Cool, wire me the money." They're like, "Well, no, I'm not wiring you the money. Something might go wrong." I'm like, "Exactly, exactly." Now you get the point. This is what a buyer is going to say to you, and
Mhm.
that kind of helps bring it home. And by the way, if you're listening and you you want to increase your value by $2 million, wire me $500,000. I'll show you how to do that. But I think a lot of owners, they've been so long, they understand the ups and the downs and the risk and all that stuff, and they just kind of forget that for someone from the outside coming in, it's not a strategic. It is someone new most of the time. It's not an employee that you're selling to. It's someone, maybe it's a searcher or a mid-level manager who's breaking out on his own. For those people, they view all this as high risk, even though they've been told this is the way to go and they believe it. It's still personal guarantee. So maybe unpack that, like the personal guarantee aspect for the buyer. Like, what is the real risk, so the owners understand what's being asked of the person that they're selling the company to.
Yep, absolutely. So it's an unlimited personal guarantee on a government backed loan. Okay, so everything is at stake, right? If you are not, your primary residence in Texas is excluded. So, shout out to Texas for that. I like that because I prefer not to have to wait for appraisals to close a loan, right? But anyway, unless they're buying a building with it, right? But it's the reality is that everything's on the line, for them and their spouse. There's offers in compromise, they're called, where you can kind of work with them if you get ahead of it. Nowhere does it say the SBA is going to accept these things. Nowhere does it say the government, it's no big deal. The government will let you pay them back $1,000 a year for the rest of your life. Like, it's not like that, right? And what I think we got to really drive home as well is, if you are playing in that SBA space, if what you have built, you know, hopefully over the last 15 years you've owned the business, you've saved some money. You got a nest egg on top of this exit cash. You'll be in a good position. Let's find out, where that delta is. Let's make sure we close that gap. But when you get to a business, unless the buyer has significant experience and really wants to get their hands dirty, we need to have systems in place. I need to know that if this, that you're not doing everything in the business. You need the systems because, or else, quite frankly, you have great cash flow. It's still limiting your buyer pool, and it really limits the financeability. Because if we look at this and we go, okay, the seller is the estimator, he's doing do everything, right? And he's got all the key customer relationships. The main customer is his brother-in-law. All of this stuff. I got to be honest, man. Unless the buyer's a unicorn on a $3 million deal, you're gonna have some serious problems getting rid of that thing, Ryan. That's been my experience.
No, I'm there with you. I'm there with you. That's why I use that $500,000 analogy, because five
I
hundred
like
thousand
that
dollars
too.
it's a lot of money. It's not like give me 5K, I'll tell you how to do it. Give me
Yeah,
500,000. I mean, I can do it for 5K, 500. It's the same information. The value obviously is
yeah,
there, but it really brings it home. Like, okay, hey, wait, you want $500,000 and you're going to increase the value by $2 million? Yes, I am. Well, but what if? And it makes owners really start to understand the buyer's perspective. And the better they understand the buyer's perspective, the stronger the company they can build. And some of these things, like you talked about with taxes and customer concentration, some of these things can be fixed fast. Some of these things not. Taxes, you said there's 3 years you're going to look at. And so if your P&Ls and all that stuff, taxes were jacked up 3 years ago and it shows a big change, questions are going to be asked. Customer concentration. We looked at a deal 2-3 months ago, and they told the owner, well, it's probably 12 to 18 months after you fix customer concentration, which means you got to fix it, which means you got to go get them, which means you got to prove that they're going to stay, which really means it's not
yeah.
12 to 18 months. It's probably 12 to 18 months of doing that, maybe 2-3 years of doing that. And then it's 12 to 18 months. So it's a long-term process. All of these are things that you have to consider because it lowers the risk for the buyer. And so what are the common mistakes though that you see that owners make that you go, guys, if you would just stop this, your deals would go through, at a faster clip, a more regular clip, however you want to phrase that?
I would say just preparation, right? The way that, SBA does not have to be a 4-letter word, right? It just doesn't. And the way that we do it is we just get ahead of the curveball. Obviously, the financials, the tax returns, the story, there'll be some questions about narrative points and how did the business do this and what's the relationship like with that? That's all normal stuff. But I tell you, like some key little things is one, if you're in a leased location, see what you can do to get that landlord know, right? Without putting their feelers up. Maybe wait till you're a little bit longer in the process, but let that landlord know that there's going to be a transfer, right? Let the landlord know that there's going to be someone else taking over that lease. So they're not blindsided and we don't get pushback that we need to navigate for an exorbitant amount of time. The other thing is get your tax clearance letter up front, right? So as you're getting into the bank process, obviously we're going to verify your federal tax, transcripts. We're going to show you owed, you paid. We're good. But as far as year to date and state and local, from your state website, it's very frequently on the Department of Revenue, on your .gov state site, pull it. The letter of good standing, it's called. The tax clearance letter, it's called. It depends on the state and jurisdiction, but that's something that sometimes can take a long time, believe it or not. And when we get ready to close your loan, if we don't have it, that's that's a serious problem. The last thing I'd say is there's vehicles that are coming with the deal, right? Maybe you've got some vans, maybe you've got some work trucks, depending on the industry. Maybe you've got a delivery vehicle because you're a florist, right? Maybe you got 4 of them. Ahead of time, make sure that you know where the titles are at, and if they're digital, how to get a hold of them. Make sure that you know how much the mileage is, ballpark. Your hand's not on the Bible there, but we got to know the VIN number, the estimated mileage, the year, make, model. Are they, what does that look like? And then the final piece I would say, Ryan, and again, this is from the buyers using an SBA lens. Plug them in with your insurance individual, especially if your agent has been good. At least let them get a feel for the current coverages, because we found a lot of sellers, because they are open to more risk than most, very often they're underinsured. And the buyer wants to make sure, heaven forbid, one of those delivery vans, gets into a serious accident, that everyone's not losing their shirt, right? So I would say that those are, maybe it's a lot to cover, but those are the things that not everyone is talking about in my space for sure. And that tax clearance letter is a big one, man. People get held up on that a lot.
I have a personal story about tax clearance. So I ran a company, the one I mentioned earlier, and I bought it as a family-run company. So I had ran it for a long time. I bought it from my father, and then a month or two after owning it, a state sends us a thing, said, "Hey, you owe sales tax." And we're like, "Sales tax? This isn't sales tax." Call my CPA, he goes, "I didn't even know that existed, that state." And we're working in another state. And I'm like, "Well, what about that state?" He goes, "I don't know." And so I fired him. But luckily my dad paid the tax because he knew, same as me, we just didn't know. We just, it wasn't tax. Like, you have sales tax on what we're doing? Like, that's so weird.
Mhm.
But make sure you get those clearance letters that your CPA is familiar with each state that you're dealing in. Because if you're working across state lines, they might say what my CPA said, which is, I'm not a CPA in that state. I have no idea. So don't assume. Luckily for me, I'd run the company. We weren't trying to hide anything. My dad understood that. But if you're doing an SBA deal, stuff like that can creep up on you and you don't even realize it. And so this was, I don't remember, it was like $250,000 of back taxes that we owed. We just didn't even know. We didn't even know because we didn't even think of the taxable service. It was so crazy. So just Texas has some pros, but people say Texas is free market. Go look at their sales tax law. It's crazy nonsense. I'll just say that for some services. And so, yeah, there's all kinds of stuff like that can come into play. And so you have to make sure that the tax clearance letter, I'm glad you brought that up because that is something that kind of slips under the radar. People forget about, and it's like, oh no, that will come back and get you. So what might be the silliest thing that you've seen break up a deal? Not someone getting cold feet, but like some just crazy thing that the owner has done. It's like, oh guys, I wish you wouldn't have done that.
Retiring early, retiring early, retiring early, retiring early until that money is in your account. Act like the deal is not going to get done. At least you can take the foot off a little. But we ran into one where the seller, really nice looking business, he had some folks behind him, but he really kind of took the foot off everything because he's like, oh, we got a signed LOI, we're good. And he just kind of took his eye off the ball. Here's the problem. Cash flow was pretty tight to begin with. We had a good buyer that knew what they were doing. So we were confident in their ability to grow in time. We knew it was a lifestyle business, dare I say it, right? But we're doing this, that, and the other. And then when we get the updated financials, Ryan, plummeted, right? And I said, guys, this is not the business I looked at. This business can carry this much debt. So for that reason, I don't know who's holding the note, who's putting cash in, but this is how much I can lend. And by the way, it's not. I mean, listen, it was a couple $100,000, right? It was not no money, and it was based on, quite frankly, the seller told me. We talked on the phone, and he goes, "Well, Al, I just started pumping stuff through the business. I'm still busy, but I figured, while I'm getting out, I might as well just." And I'm like, "Bro, don't tell me that. I'm trying to help you. I respect what you've built. You deserve this exit, but brother, you just sabotaged this exit too."
Yeah, no, yeah. Until the cash is in the bank. And that's keyword, cash is in the bank, because if something happens and the cash doesn't hit the bank, call your lawyer. So until the cash is in the bank, man, don't take your foot off the gas because, oh gosh, and that's important because people think I've got an LOI, I'm good. And to your point, if you're a buyer and you're going to buy a business and then the LOI comes in, it's really hard to be honest and say, it's hard for a buyer, perhaps I should say, to believe that, oh, well, it's just because I took my foot off the gas. Like, well, did you really? Are you that important to the business? Like, or did something else happen? It asks those questions. Wait, what if I get sick? It brings in all this stuff. And there's just the financial component you mentioned, but there's also just those mental questions that become very relevant now because you have let them enter into the equation and you have to. And so it's a thing to where sellers, until the cash is in the bank, you're dead on. Don't take your foot off the gas. It's very tempting, but the buyer could back out last second, and then all of a sudden you got to go through this process again. And so it's just not a done deal. So Owners listening right now, they go, okay, I do have an LOI. They are talking about SBA. How long is this process for the SBA going to take to get done?
So that is going to depend on a lot of factors, right? If everyone is motivated and giving the process their attention, if they have attorneys already working with them, I mentioned the bookkeeper, the CFO. If the sellers do it themselves, that's totally fine, as so long as they have the time to give the attention to be responsive. From full submission on our end to funding right now is averaging on my team, right? So I kind of have a different deal at the bank. It's 75 days, right, from submission to funding. We've been quicker, okay, but we've been longer. And the times we've been longer, what skews outward are things like the things we talked about earlier. Or when we're doing UCC and lien searches, heaven forbid, we find out that there's still a UCC from a loan that was paid off. But Ryan, the loan was made from a bank that has since been absorbed twice, and we don't know what back office to call because it doesn't exist anymore. And buyer and seller, nobody's mad at each other, but we're all working together to figure out how do we prove this is fine, because we need to prove that it's fine, right? Those are the rules. The bank can't like, oh no, we trust you guys. We have to figure that out, right? So that's something. Also, I mean, when there's commercial real estate in the deal, sometimes it can take longer based on appraisals, environmental reports that have to be done depending on industry, and that can skew us outward. Where we've been quicker is when we have an executed purchase agreement. We're going to do the bill of sale at the closing table, but if we can get the purchase agreement agreed upon while we're still in underwriting, if we can get the landlord and the buyer connected early on, so there's no surprises there, they understand the way the lease needs to look. If we can do those things early, by all means, we can be quick. I mean, I'm lucky, man. On a lot of my deals, I'm not trying to, whatever, but like Scott Oliver is a fantastic bank side attorney, right? I think he's going to be a guest here, or if he hasn't been yet. But Scott, like, I got a good folks working on my stuff, but we can only control what we have the ability to control. So if my suggestion to a seller that's looking for the quickest close possible is to be reasonable and to not panic, because what happens is you get hung up on details and you're so upset about, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? There's still all this other stuff we could be working on. Yeah, that tax clearance letter is going to take 3 weeks, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing making sure that the non-compete language makes sense. If there's a seller note, the language makes sense. The landlord waiver, again, I keep honing on that. There's always something to do. The quicker we can get to it, the better we'll close. And my buyers, I make sure that they are getting all those items in while they're in underwriting, because I have certainty of execution. So that results in a different experience than other folks. Not everybody that does what I do is the same. Not everybody at my bank does it the way I do it, right? So that's something that we've noticed to be successful. Let's get ahead of it. I understand. I can look at a purchase agreement and tell you at a high level if it's totally off. And if it looks iffy, we can send it to legal, whomever that may be.
Yeah, and you mentioned landlords a few times.
Yeah.
If your business is tied to any types of contracts, you need to go ahead and have your attorney review if they're assignable. Same thing with the landlord thing that you're talking about, right? Is it assignable to someone else? And if not, what's that process going to be like? Because in some industries, you have contracts and they're not assignable. You just can't give a new owner that company. I mean, you can have to buy equity purchase. Anyways, but those are the kinds of things that you have to know about before you go through this process, or during this process, you're going to be found out. Like, oh, I can't do an asset sale because all my contracts are tied to the company, so I got to do equity sales. That restructures how we're going to do stuff, and that's the kind of stuff that buyers are going to want to know about. So go ahead and talk to your business attorney about that. Okay, any final thoughts before we get out of here? This has been great. I've loved all this information. It's one of those things where there's so much that can make a deal go wrong. The better prepared you are, the better chance you have of it going forward. You mentioned your SEPA. I think they put out 80% of companies don't ever sell. So it's because of stuff like this. So where can people find you? Any final thoughts?
Absolutely. So, I'm on social media with just at my name, SBA. That's AlanPeterson, SBA, at all platforms. I'm most active probably on LinkedIn. I'm trying to get back in on X more frequently, but it's hard to keep up with it because I'm working all day. My closing thoughts would be, if you're looking to buy a business or sell a business, regardless of who you work with, if you're getting to SBA. I'd love to work with you, but you don't have to. Make sure whomever you work with knows where the landmines are. There's a lot of well-meaning generalist lenders that will do a working capital deal. They'll do a debt refi. They'll do whatever. Make sure whomever it is knows business acquisitions intimately. That's my advice, because that's how SBA gets a 4-letter name.
Okay, Alan. Thank you so much for your time today, man. It's been good to talk and connect, and best of luck in the future.
Thanks, Ryan. I really appreciate you, man. I'll talk to you soon.